All right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out. I know it's I don't know what's going on out there, but it's it's a day. In here, though, it's a very important day. It's of course the last meeting that we have before spring break, which is kind of important. Hope you all are gonna have some time to chill and relax over spring break. There's not really any homework for me due over spring break, although I do want to mention I've had several people ask about the late policy. I am going to be catching up on grading over spring break, and I really need to have everything by Monday the 10th. So if you have any assignments outstanding, I'll still take them. I just need them by Monday the 10th because I'm going to get everything graded and back to you by the end of spring break, so that when we get back from spring break, all we have left to focus on for the remaining 6 weeks of the class is the project. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're actually going to get the project started up today. And I'm actually going to walk you through that same process that we kind of did on Monday's class, because I think that's one of the hardest things for students to grasp about this project is you're not graded on the quantity of code that you give me necessarily, right? If you don't give me any code, that's a problem. But you don't need to impress me by dumping buckets of code on me. That's not actually going to impress me. I'm more interested in the process. I'm even less interested in, how well does the code work? I hope it does work, right? But even if there's a few small mistakes here and there, that's not going to concern me as much as, are you following the process? Are you making code contributions in the way that we have tried to teach that in this class, using all of the skills and all the concepts that we've covered over the first half of the class. So what I'm going to do today is kind of walk you through project setup. We're going to go through that process one more time. That's the process of adding new code to the project. I know we did it a couple times on Monday. We're going to do it again today, just one final time to make sure everybody's aware what I'm looking for on this project. I'm going to point out some things along the way that I'll be looking for in particular for you to keep in mind about the project. And then towards the end of class today, I'm hoping that there definitely will be some extra time. If you need to find a group, then I want to leave some time for you to find a group. I can also try to help assist with that if you need assistance. And of course, if you have any outstanding homework assignments left, be a good time to work on those, get questions answered about those, and try and get those wrapped up as well. So let's talk about this project. Actually, you can see that the first the first official due date is the team formation that's due this Friday. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But actually, as far as the project itself, the first official due date is 2 weeks after we get back from spring break. This project is split into 3 iterations. So you're going to be working on the same project, but there's 3 different checkpoints that we're going to be doing. And the first one is due 2 weeks, and the next one will be 2 weeks after that. Each one's going to last 2 weeks. For each of those, I'm asking for every person in your group to complete 2 user stories, 2 tasks. 2 tasks per person in your group to make some sort of a contribution to this project. And those tasks should follow the process that I am stressing. Include good testing, make sure that all of the testing and functional code is in its own branch, use good branching concepts, pull requests, and clean code, and all of that good stuff. So if you actually take a look at what you're going to be graded on in terms of the code itself, these are the 5 categories, the 5 different criteria that you'll be graded on in terms of the code itself. So testing being the first one, are there an adequate number of tests? I expect your code to be well tested, although there are some exceptions, some things that I don't expect to be tested, which I'll try and remind you of later today. The repository management piece, are you using proper branching and merging strategies? Do you have a development branch set up, right? Are you making branches for each task? Are you using pull requests to merge those branches back into your development branch? I want to see all of that. I want to see all of that in your repositories. The project management piece is that board with the cards on it, with the actual tasks. I want to see those actually labeled in that specific format that I requested. A blank should be able to blank. Every single task on that board should follow that format. I want to see that each person in your group is assigned to 2 of those things per iteration, right? So for every iteration, you should have a couple of those assigned to yourself. and you're going to have to sit down with your team and kind of brainstorm and decide who's going to work on what. I want to see that the code is clean. So I don't expect you to write perfect code the first time. I rarely write perfect code the first time. Actually, I'd say I rarely write perfect code at all. It's always an improvement, but I'm definitely not cranking out beautiful code the first time. I am writing crappy code and then coming back and cleaning it up. So I'm expecting that as well. Definitely going to be looking for things like, are there methods longer than 20 lines, you know? Not to say that every method longer than 20 lines is an immediate rule breaker, but you better have a good reason, right? Or be able to justify why that particular method needs to be so big. We talked about several other rules about code quality, code cleanliness in the class as well. And then the last topic is, does it work? So this is actually, you know, primarily what you're graded on in basically every other assignment and every other class, right? Does the code that you wrote do the thing that you say that it does? But in this class, that's a very small part of it. And actually, as I mentioned, if you're upfront with me, you're like, hey, I tried to work on this, but I couldn't quite figure it out. There's still a couple bugs. I'm okay with that, right? Documenting your process, documenting your progress, being aware of outstanding issues shows that you're doing a good job, in my opinion, right? I don't expect everything to be absolutely perfect on the first try, but if you're aware of what's going on, that's a good sign to me. Another piece of this is a console app. This is a command line app. So I'm also asking you to write a little script that will compile and run your code on the command line. Right? Get it kicked off on the command line so that when we do our first peer review, which is going to be on that due date of iteration 1, that the people who are reviewing your project will be able to just clone the repo, kick off your script, and test out your stuff. That's the hope. Okay? I know this is different. That's why we're doing this 3 times. So you may or may not have noticed that iteration 1 is not worth as many points as iteration 2, which is not worth as many points as iteration 3. So I really want to stress that there is always a chance for redemption on these iterations. As you can probably imagine, iteration 1 is usually the worst in terms of how people do about following this process. But if you get the feedback from your peers and myself, and you do a better job on iteration 2 and iteration 3 of following the process and making those contributions, then I can and will go back and revise your scores on prior iterations if you fix them up and clean up the problems that existed. You can show me that you can do it properly. So the other thing that you're going to be graded on for the project, on the very first day of class, we talked about what it means to be a good programmer. So you're also going to be providing feedback on your team members to make sure that everybody is actually contributing. Of course, I have ways of checking that as well by just looking at your project board, right? Seeing who's assigned to what, where those tasks are. So, but there's a lot of stuff going on that I'm not going to be aware of. You're going to be meeting with your team members, talking to them, texting them, or whatever communication form you use I'm not involved with. So I need you to give me feedback on how your peers are doing. That's another part of the process as well. And we're going to do both of those things, the team feedback and the peer review feedback, when the first iteration is due in a couple of weeks. So that's kind of my basic introduction to the project. I am going to actually start the project with you and write the first bits of code for the project before I turn you all loose on it. But before I get to that, I just kind of want to see if anybody has any questions about the structure of the project itself or what it is that I'm asking of you. I know this is a little bit different, so if there's any confusion, would love to clear that up now. Yes?
Are there any restrictions on external libraries?
Oh, great question. Yeah, thanks for asking. So I generally don't mind if you want to use external libraries in your code. It's not required. I would say it's very doable to get through the project with just relying on the plain old Java code that you write, and that's kind of what it's intended for. That being said, this is a console app, so any libraries that are trying to provide a user interface with windows and buttons, graphical, that's not this class. That is strictly forbidden. If you need a library to perform some utility for you, like I want to send an email to somebody after something happens. You know, like that's okay. Yeah, absolutely, that's totally fine. And let me know if you need help hooking stuff like that up. Always happy to assist if needed. Any other questions I can address before we start digging into the project itself and writing a little bit of code to get everybody off to a good start? Okay, then let's do it. We're gonna. I'm actually gonna do the first task for all of you, and then once I'm done, I will unleash the project repositories. The link doesn't work yet because I'm gonna add some code to it first, and then I'll try to make sure everybody's off to a good start because getting everything up and running can be quite tricky. I don't want you to lose a whole iteration to just getting stuff set up. So I'm gonna try and make sure everybody gets off to a good, even start. The app that we're making, I've actually already loaded a repository for it, but there's absolutely no code in it. We're going to be making a banking app, a simple banking application. It was chosen intentionally to be somewhat boring, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not looking for exciting code. I'm looking for functional code that follows the process. And if you get a job working at a big company, the code you work on is going to be boring sometimes. That's just a fact of life. So if you're not terribly excited about making a banking app, I understand. It's not the most thrilling project to work on in the world, but it was chosen somewhat because of that fact, just to give us something to work on. It's not meant to be complex, right? This is meant to be simple. I don't want you to spend a lot of time focusing on how to get fancy things to work as much as getting the process down to make simple things work. So with that in mind, I'm going to do the first bit right now, and also I think it's good to get it on video so that when you get together with your group for the first time, you have something to refer back to about how to help get your project up and running. Because some of this stuff you're going to have to do yourself, such as setting up your project board. So every single repository needs to have its own project board. So you're going to have to make this for your group when you get your repository. I showed you how to do this last time, but I'm going to show you again this time, just so we're all aware. We're going to use a board template. Up here, call it whatever you want. I'll call it banking app. And then create the project. The default board actually only comes with 3 lanes. I want 4 lanes. I want an in review lane to appear here. I actually added that last time as well. So let me show you how to do that so that you can refer back to this video if you need to add this later. I went to the settings for my project board, and then down here, somewhere down here, status. You have to click on status. And then here are the different possible options. I want one called in review. So I'm going to add that. And in review should happen, in between something that is being worked on and something that has been completed. It needs to be reviewed first by your team. So I created that 4th additional lane there to add that into my project board. And now I'm actually ready to start adding some issues to my project board. So when you get together with your team for the first time, you need to pick up some issues. Remember, everybody needs at least 2. So if you have 3 people in your group, that means you need to have 6 issues here, 6 user stories, 6 things that you want your application to do before you can even get started on some stuff. I'm not going to do that many right now, but I will create an issue, or maybe 2. I'm going to create a blank issue, and I want to call that issue, so I'm going to pick the low-hanging fruit, right? We're doing a banking app, banking with bank accounts and things like that. I'm going to pick some of the low-hanging fruit and say a user should be able to deposit into an account. This is the form that I expect to see. Actually, user is maybe not even specific enough. A bank customer, right, is even more specific than a user, because other people might use this application as well. The people who work at the bank, the administrators, the tellers might use this app as well. So it's good to be specific about what's going on here. A bank customer should be able to deposit into account. So a blank should be able to blank. I want this to be the format of every single issue that gets added to this board. If you need to put down some extra information here, that can be a good thing to do. Sometimes there'll be an obvious order that things need to happen in. So if you have issues that kind of depend off of one another, you might want to make a note of that here. Can't do this one until this other thing is done first. You know, that's a good thing to be aware of. Any other information that might be useful. If you want to use an external library to do this task, you might add that information down here as well. Once you get it all set up, we'll go ahead and create it. I think it's also obvious, somewhat obvious, that there should be a similar one for, you know, a bank customer should be able to withdraw from an account, right? We'll create that as a blank issue as well. So here's a couple. I'm going to do the deposit one. That's the one I'm going to do for today. So I'll open it up and make sure that it's assigned to myself. Oops. There we go. And once it's been assigned to myself, I'm ready to start coding on it, which means I can drag this over to the in progress bucket to let everybody know that this is what I'm working on right now. This is the task that I'm currently working on. That way there's no confusion amongst our team about who's doing what. And now we can start writing some actual code. We have a little bit of setup to do first. I talked last time about how I believe it's very important for each task to have its own branch. And those branches should be merged not into main, but into development branch. So I'm going to try and give everybody a big push in the right direction and make that development branch for all of us right now so that I can make this task branch as well. Before class started, I already cloned the repository that will be used as the basis for the project. So I've already got it up in Git. I've already got some stuff in here. But this is the main branch. So the main branch right now is when you clone this, it'll just be an empty Eclipse project. It'll look exactly like this. There's a source folder here, but there's literally nothing in it. There's a README file here, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but there's nothing in this. Absolutely nothing in this. And you should not be adding things directly to main. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create our development branch right now. And I'll switch to my development branch. And at this point in time, I'm ready to make yet another branch that is going to be for the task that I'm completing. So I will create another branch called what? Account deposit. Something related to the task that I'm completing. Sometimes people like to put the issue number as well, so everything gets assigned an issue number. Here's the issue number here. It's number 1. It's the first one I created. This one's number 2, right? Sometimes people like to put that issue number in the branch as well, so there's a clear link. That's fine with me. I'm also fine if you leave it out. What matters to me is that you have a descriptive name of what this task is. Again, remember, never should your name be on branch. I don't want to see that. I want to see people's names on branch names. Branches don't belong to people, they belong to tasks that are being completed. And actually the same thing kind of goes for, you know, the project board as well, right? The actual tasks should not be based on a person, they should be based on what you want your code to do. So here we go. Now that I have switched us over to an account deposit branch, keep in mind that this should automatically detect that I have switched branches in Eclipse, even though I didn't do it through Eclipse. It should still see, am I in the right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Just making sure I'm in the right directory real quick before I move on. But so any changes that if I switch a branch on the command line, Eclipse will automatically detect that and move me to that new branch within Eclipse as well. So you don't actually need to switch branches in Eclipse, but you can if you want to. That's also an option. Regardless, I'm ready to start writing some code, and I'm going to start by writing the tests. So good tasks will have not just functional code, but also tests I'm going to make two packages for us right now. One for the bank app itself that contains the functional code, and one for the tests. And we'll start with we'll actually start with the unit tests, because I'm a big fan of trying to do some test-driven development. Since we're dealing with depositing into a bank account, I'm going to write some unit tests for that bank account class. And I'll call it bank account tests. And now we're ready to start writing some unit tests. I can remember we have to have every test has to start with this annotation, and then we make a regular old method. I'll call this one test simple deposit. Remember, the bank account doesn't exist yet. That's okay. We'll create it after we write the tests. The idea here, and this is kind of a good review for people who might still be working on assignment 5. So I know there are still probably some who are on 7 as well. The idea here is that I'm going to write tests that, even though they don't work right now, once they do work, they prove to me that this code can do a certain thing. So the idea is, how can I write a test that shows that a deposit was successfully made into this bank account? So the first thing we need to do is make our bank account object. That's step 1. Actually, this is a good review. Step 1, create objects to be tested. And already we kind of have to think about, okay, does a bank account constructor need any information? Do I need to pass any values in here to construct a bank account? I think there's a couple different ways you could go with this. I think one answer is to just leave it blank, that's fine. But I think also you could want to start a bank account with an initial value, so that could be a potential option as well. For now, I'm just going to leave it blank, and if you and your group members decide you need an additional constructor later, then that's totally fine. You have the ability to add that in. But for now, we are able to call the method being tested. So every unit test is focused not on an object, but on a method. It's testing, and even then, it's testing one particular piece of a method. I'm not going to test an entire method with just one unit test. I'm actually going to write multiple unit tests to cover one method, to make sure that every possible path that I can conceivably think of through that method is tested properly. So I will call a simple deposit on this, say account.deposit. I'll just put 25 bucks in. I probably need to spell it properly, right? This method does not exist yet, but you can see that the way I've written it implies that when I call the deposit method, I have to specify how much money I'm depositing, right? That's the implication of writing it this way. I don't see how it could work if I didn't. And then finally, we'll create an assertion. To verify our results. And in this case, we need to have some way of asking a bank account how much money it has, right? So I'm going to need to call some sort of a getter. And then compare that against the expected value of 25. But recall that when I am using assertions with non-exact data types, like doubles that have rounding errors, we also have to provide some tolerance, which I always use some, reasonably small number, like 0.005. And at this point, we actually have a test that fails, but I would argue this isn't enough. This is one successful path, one successful route to depositing money into a bank account. But let's think about other things that could happen, especially things that are weird or maybe not natural circumstances that we would expect. For example, what happens if I put a negative value in here? The computer's not going to stop me from doing that. But I don't really like that. A negative deposit is not really a thing. Those are called withdrawals. I don't really want to use a method called deposit to make a withdrawal. That's confusing, unintuitive, and could lead to unexpected side effects as well, like infinite money glitches, things like that. We definitely don't want that to happen. So we need to write a test that makes sure if somebody does call this method with a negative value, that it's flagged as an issue. It's an error. Actually, in Java, we have the ability to throw an exception, which is something that we talked about a little while back, a week or two ago. I want to show you how you could write a unit test, actually, to test whether an exception is thrown or not. This is an interesting thing to know how to do. Test negative deposit. So same steps. We're going to create the object to be tested. And actually, it's probably going to be the same as before. Just call the constructor. We're going to call the method being tested, but this time we have to do it with a negative value. So if I put in negative 25, think about what we want to happen here. We want an exception to be thrown. So if I want to verify that an exception has been thrown here, we have to use one of those try-catch statements that I showed you in class a little while ago within our unit tests. So what we'll say is, try to do this bad thing. This is a bad thing. This is negative behavior that we don't want to happen. I would expect that if this does happen, I will catch some sort of an exception. You can be generic about it. You can say this would be any generic exception. But if you can be specific about it, I think you should be. This would, I think, fall under the category of an illegal argument exception. So if we get here, that actually means that the test worked, right? That actually means that this was a success. If an exception does not get thrown and it accepts the negative 25 without any, warnings or errors getting thrown, then that's a failure. So we can actually say fail right here. I think we need to import it. Is that right? No? Oh, well, I probably need to set up JUnit. Here we go. We're going to add JUnit 5. This was going to need to be done anyway. Is it called? Yeah, fail. This does exactly as it expects. And actually here, we can just say, if we wanted to, we could put an assertion here. The assertion that I might put here is something like E is not equal to null. The exception exists, right? It's not null, it exists. Need to import that. Okay. So now we have two tests. We have two tests that check deposit. I think I could argue for potentially maybe even more. What happens if I try to deposit, really large sums of money? Would that cause any problems? I certainly would not be happy if there was an overflow error in my bank, and I thought I had X number of dollars, and then looping back around and thinking that would be bad. So I think those are also things that are worth considering to be tested. But to keep things moving here, we're gonna move on to the next part of this, which is to make sure that, we have two tests that fail. That's what test-driven development tells us to do. Have at least one test that fails. We have two. That's good. More is always better. Now we're going to write the code that passes these tests, to make these tests pass. So let's go ahead and do that by creating our bank account class. The only instance variable I think that I've demonstrated a need for so far is the balance. Now we're keeping this very simple right now. This app doesn't say anything about having multiple customers. It doesn't say anything about having to log in or anything like that. There's one bank account that I'm checking to make sure I can deposit and withdraw to. So if you want to have multiple customers that can access multiple accounts, that's something that you'll need to make tasks for, right? And assign them to people and implement in much the same way that I'm doing here. But for now, we're just going to keep things just what we need to solve the tests that we are trying to pass. I'll use my default constructor, set the balance to be 0 at the beginning, right? I don't know what else I would set it to be. Our tests state that we need to have a deposit method. So it doesn't indicate any sort of a return value. You'll notice that I'm not storing any kind of return value here. So that kind of implies that maybe it should be void. It does look like it accepts some amount of money. And in the simplest case, it's just going to say, you know, this dot balance plus equals amount. And we're already maybe going to pass one of our tests. We just have to have another method called get current balance. It's just a very simple getter, right? Whoops. So I'll add in that getter real quick. All right. And at this point in time, I believe we should pass at least the first test. Do we need to import? Yeah, we need to import our bank account class. We need to import this guy. So many imports. Got a bunch of unit test imports. Got one for my bank account. Don't forget to do those. That is definitely going to be something you need to remember to do. All right, this actually none of these tests look like they are mad at me at the moment, but let's go ahead and try and run them and see what happens now that I've done some simple code. Cool. Actually, exactly what I was expecting. The simple deposit one passed, but the negative deposit one didn't. So what happened there is that it just, you know, took in the negative $25 and didn't complain. So the test said, that's not supposed to happen, right? So we need to fix that. We need to actually go back and add the code in that makes it throw the exception for improper values. And we can do that with the simple if statement. If amount is less than, I guess 0 is technically an okay number. It's a little odd. I think there should be a test for that, right? I'm not going to write it. I might leave that one for you, but what should happen if I deposit 0? That's kind of an edge case, right? Should I allow that? Should I not allow that? I think you'll need to think about that and make a decision for yourself. But clearly if it's negative, we don't want that. So we'll throw a new illegal argument exception. This is an error. We are saying this is an error. And now if we run our tests again, then they both passed now. So the one that was expecting the exception got the exception. So I've now tested a good scenario and a bad scenario. I think that's nice. However, I would argue that we're still not done. We're still not done here. And to understand why, consider that I don't expect a bank customer to call the deposit method on a bank account instance, right? That's for programmers to do. I expect bank customers to interact with some sort of a more user-friendly menu. And so that needs to be included as part of this task as well. The programmer side of things works, and that's great. But we also need to make sure that the user-facing side of things also exists and is functional. So we need to have a menu. We need to have a menu. So I'm going to go ahead and create a menu next. And we can only do one thing right now. All we can do is deposit into an account. So, okay, let's think about that in terms of instance variables. I have one bank account right now called the account. I think most of you are probably going to get tired of this pretty quickly and say, I actually don't want just one bank account. I want to be able to have lots of bank accounts, and I want people to be able to have different bank accounts. But for now, this is all we've claimed that we are going to do, is have one bank account that can accept deposits. If you don't like that, then make a task for it and make it different. We'll create a menu constructor, and all that's going to do is set up our bank account. And then for every piece of user interface, for every piece of menu code, I want you to consider that this also needs to be tested. There's some stuff that doesn't need to be tested, but I do want you to test as much as possible. And in order to do that, you really need to deconstruct all of the things that are happening here. I would argue that every user interaction has 3 things in the code, 3 things that it requires in the code. So let's talk about those 3 things here. The first one would be to display options. So right now we only have one option. That's it. That's all. But over time, as you add in other functionalities, the list of options is going to grow, and they're going to have to tell you which option they want to do. And then based on which option they select, they'll have to provide more information, right, to complete that operation. But this code is not going to be tested. This is just display. All this does is going to print out some text. That's it. We're going to keep the stuff that is just displaying information separate from everything else. So this method don't need to be tested. So here I would just say something like, please let enter an amount to be deposited. And that's really it. That's really the only option there is right now. That's it. As I said, later on, when you have more things, you'll have to expand this out and make it do more stuff. But for right now, that's it. The second thing, the second part of this process is to get that user feedback, that user input. So in this particular case, I'm asking them to enter in, an amount they want to be deposited. So I need a scanner to do that. Oops. I'll go ahead and grab a double from them. I probably should give it a name, huh? And probably should use the proper variable name here as well, huh? There we go. And then finally I'll return that value. This is another example of a method that doesn't need to be tested. So because user input is required, and that, who knows how long that's going to take, right? I can't have somebody sit at my keyboard and type in values when I run the unit test. That defeats the purpose of having the unit test in the first place. So this doesn't need to be tested. However, the last part, processing user input. This does need to be tested. So anytime we are processing what a user has told us, right? They have given us all of the information, told us what they want to do. We now have to do that thing, and then we have to demonstrate that that thing has been done. So this method can be tested, should be tested. So in this case, since all we're doing is deposits, right? The only thing that I would necessarily expect to come in is a dollar value for the amount, and then I'll just say something like the account.deposit, amount. That's it. That's all that needs to happen here. Consider though that if you wanted to have two options, even just adding one additional option makes this a bit more complex, because first they have to tell me whether they want to do a deposit or a withdrawal, and then what the amount is. So think about how this method would have to change. I now have to say, okay, not only do I need the amount, but I also need some indication of what operation. Am I using this amount for a deposit or a withdrawal? Do I need an extra parameter to reflect that? Do I need another instance variable to reflect that? I mean, that's up for you. That's up for you and your team to decide how to actually pull that off, how to implement it, how to make it happen. But I do think that it's important to keep those three things separate and test this, right? So if the user says they want to do a deposit of this amount, make sure that can actually happen. And in order to test this, we need to have probably some sort of getter. So I'll say public bank account get count that returns now again, we only have one account right now. That's all we have. If we have lots of accounts, then I would need to do some more work here probably, or rethink how I do this method. But since all we have is one account right now, this is enough to get us access to tests, and I'll go ahead and actually, I did a little bit backwards this time. I wrote the functional code first, and now I'm going to write the tests for the menu afterwards. Not usually how I prefer to do it, but that's okay. I think it's not unusual to have it happen this way either, to be perfectly honest with you. I'll call this test user deposit, since this time I'm trying to test the deposit through the user interface. The steps are the same. The steps are exactly the same. One is create object being tested. So in this case, it's not a bank account, but a menu, because the menu is managing the bank account on the user's behalf. That's the purpose of the menu. So, okay, menu is a new menu. I'm now going to call the method being tested, which in this case is for the menu is almost always going to be a method that processes the user input. So in this case, I would say m.process user input and just put in some number, 25. And then finally, use assertions to verify correctness. I have to grab the bank account from the menu before I can do the assertion of getting the balance should be equal to 25 with a tolerance of something like that. As before, I think these are just imports that need to be fixed. There we go. Also need to import that. There we go. Cool. So for this one task, I have actually written 3 tests. 2 of them that just affect what I would call, what most people would probably call the more back-end side of things, and one that tests the front-end side of things. I think all of them are required. Honestly, if I had more time, I would probably try to think of even more. I've already mentioned some that I think would be valuable to include, but do your best. Come up with as many valid tests as you can possibly conceive of. And now, finally, I think we're at a place where we can probably move on to the next phase here. Before we commit and push, I think very useful to keep in mind that you're being graded on your code quality as well. So double check your variable names, double check your methods, make sure you're passing. We're just getting started out. There's not a ton of code here, but you can imagine by iteration 3, you're going to have a significant chunk. So that's going to become a bigger concern as your code base gets larger and larger. But we're ready to commit and push what we have. I'm going to do it on the command line just because I can. Oh, I need to do a commit first. So I'll add everything and say deposits are now functional. I need to push, actually need to push this branch and the development branch, even though I haven't merged anything into development yet. I did create it, so I need to push origin account deposit. So push that branch. I'm going to check out my development branch. Git push origin development branch. Okay, and then I'm going to go back to my my project and my repository, which, where is the actual repository itself? I want to open a pull request for it. I can click on one of these issues and then go to the repository. There we go. I want to create a pull request for the code that I've added. Make sure that when you create your pull requests, you're not asking them to be merged into main. Again, we want them to be merged into the development branch. At this point in time, I would be, after I create the pull request, so if I have any potential issues, things that I think might not be working properly, that would be something to go here, or anything I think my teammates need to be aware of, that would go here. But go ahead and create your pull requests. At this point in time, you are ready to go ahead and move the task over into in review. And this is a cue to your teammates, right, that a pull request has been created. If you see a card in this lane, that's a cue that a pull request has been created for this task and it's waiting for sign off on the rest of your team members. Just to give it a quick once over, make sure you didn't miss anything, make sure it all looks good. And then once your teammates have hopefully signed off on that and said that they're happy with it, you can then follow through by where's my pull request? I already did create a branch for this issue. Did I not link the pull request to it? That's okay. I can still get there from here. Once you decide that everything is ready to go, you can hit the merge to merge this into development. And at that point in time, that task has been officially completed. So you're able to move that task over to the completed column. I know that was kind of a lot. It was the first one, so there was a bit of like setup and extra stuff that I had to do just because it was the first one, but I am trying to get y'all off to a good start here. I think that you'll find that adding to existing code doesn't necessarily require as much steps as I just went through, but the process is still the same. I'm going to pause here and see if anybody has any questions about what I just did, what the process is. I'm asking you to do that process twice for the first iteration. Yeah. Could be. I think that's a question that you and your team will have to decide upon. I think part of it decides on what direction you want to go in. So some people, there is some flexibility on this project, right? I'm letting you decide the tasks. So there are some obvious ones. I think I've already mentioned it. Having multiple customers is a thing that kind of implies some sort of a login password process, which I'm not opposed to you tackling if that's something that your group is interested in. But you also don't necessarily have to include that if you don't want to. You could try and go a different direction with it. Sometimes people want to talk about managing the different branches of a bank and all the people that work there and what their schedules are. And like, okay, that's not necessarily what I had in mind when I thought this, but it fits in the category. You don't have a problem with that. I think you do have some flexibility, some leeway, and so if you have multiple users, you want to split that code up to here's the admin, here's the customer. I think having separate menus for that makes a lot of sense, which to me says separate classes, have an admin menu and a customer menu. I think that another thing that you'll probably run into, or maybe you won't, but a lot of projects do. Oh shoot! Because I switched branches, I lost all my stuff. That's cool. I can get it back though by doing a poll real quick, because I merged. So git poll origin development. There we go. Now it should hopefully have my stuff again. There we go. Yeah, if your menu starts getting large, oh, well, did I do something wrong? I'm a little bit confused. I would have expected to see all of my code. Did I not get it added? I think I did my commit wrong. Let me go back and fix that real quick. But what I was going to say is if your menu starts getting large, you need to start breaking it up into sub-menus. And if you have multiple classes, right, for your menu, that's not a bad thing. Actually, I will almost never complain about how many classes you have. That is one of the few things that there is no limit on how much is acceptable. Creating new classes is a good thing. Having lots of small classes, I would argue, is a good thing. It's the toolbox theory. It's, if you want to get tools out of a toolbox, which would you rather do? Would you rather have a toolbox with lots of tiny compartments and everything very well organized, or just one big bin that everything's chucked into, right? So classes are your nice little organized little bins to keep everything where they need to go. You'll never hear me complain about creating too many classes or anything like that. Let me fix this real quick because I'm about ready to turn you loose and let you work on this with your group mates. But I just wanted to make sure this is working first, because I forgot to commit that menu stuff, I guess. Git add. Git add src. All right, let me make sure I got it all now. Where are my? Did I lose my stuff? Oh no, what the heck happened? Where did my stuff go? I made a mistake, but I don't know where I made my mistake. I'm a little bit confused about that. I had all the stuff. Where did I make a mistake? How did it get? I'm really confused. I'm sorry about that, y'all. I'll try and get that fixed up for you, but I don't want to spend any more time on it. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn you loose, actually, on the project. I'm gonna enable the project link. So here's what I would like for you to do before you leave today. Hopefully, ideally, before you leave today, you will have figured out who your group members are. You will have done two things for me, hopefully by the time that you leave, and maybe even more if you get around to it. The first thing that I need you to do is click on the team formation link and fill out this form. It's just simply asking me who your teammates are. That's it. Remember, at least 3. You can't have 4. Less than 3, more than 4 is not. It's 3 or 4. That's what I'm looking for. So 3 or 4 people per group. Any other values are not done unless it's necessary for matching purposes. So fill out this form, and then the other thing that I would like for you to do, I just turned on the GitHub Classroom link to clone the project repository. It should have at least some of the code that I just wrote with you. I'm not sure why it doesn't have all of the code, because I made a mistake, which is unfortunate, but it does have at least the bank account tests and stuff in it. So go ahead and click on that link, and then after you click on that link, do one more thing for me. And on the repository itself, you'll notice that there is a README file. with blank spots for your team members' names. If you could just put your team members' names here real quick, just so that when I look at a repository, I know whose repository I'm looking at. And then there's some questions down here that you don't need to answer until later on. One final thing before I stop talking and get out of your way. What's going to happen after spring break? If you take a look at the calendar, you'll notice that aside from the dates that the iterations are due, which I do expect, you all to, especially for the first iteration, it's your first peer review, I really want everybody to come so that I can walk you through the peer reviews, make sure you understand what I'm looking for. For these other ones, I will be here, but they're labeled work days, right? I want you to treat this like this is your job. I know you have at least a handful of other classes that you're working on, so it's not a full-time job, but it is at least your job for this class. So treat this like your job for the next 6 weeks after you get back from break. I'm here just to provide general advice, assistance as needed. So I will be here in class every Monday and Wednesday, but there's not like a topic, right? I expect you to work. I expect you to make progress on the project. So I want you to spend your time doing that. Meet with your groups. I think it's a great time to have meetings with your groups. Question? That's all done through GitHub Classroom, just like you've done in past classes. At least I'm assuming you've done that in past classes. I'm using the groups feature. So one person will make the group, and then the other team members will have to join the group with their GitHub accounts using the link. You all click the same link. I believe that link should be active now. Yeah, it's active now. So you can go ahead and start forming your projects. If you need help finding your group, or if you're short one person or something like that, let me know and I can try to help resolve those kinds of situations. But before you leave, please fill out that team formation form, set up your repository, and start having some basic combos. I know a lot of you probably aren't going to touch this before you get back from break, but you can at least still have some basic conversations about direction. Okay, let me know what help you need, all right? Thanks.